My name is Emily Turner. I am 37 years old, and I live in Burlington, Vermont. And if I am being completely honest with you, I never imagined I would sit down one day to tell this kind of story. But here I am, speaking to you, because of one terrifying truth. If I hadn't listened to my daughter's warning that night, I might not be alive today. That thought still sends a chill down my spine. It's strange how a single sentence, spoken by a child, can change the course of everything. You know, people always talk about a mother's intuition, but what about a child's children see and feel things we brush off as imagination? I almost ignored her. Almost. And if I had, you wouldn't be hearing my voice right now. I want you to picture this: a family that looked perfect from the outside, a home filled with light, laughter, and warm breakfasts in the morning. But behind closed doors, shadows were moving. Smiles didn't always reach the eyes. Words carried weight I didn't understand at the time. And there I was, a wife and a mother, caught in the middle of love, loyalty, and the uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. When I look back now, I realize how betrayal creeps in quietly, almost politely, until one day it tries to swallow you whole. And yet, in the middle of all that fear and danger, my daughter's small voice became the lifeline that pulled me through. This is not just my story. It's about trust, survival, and the way a child's courage can save a family. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the house we called home, and the people I thought I knew best. Because that's where it all started. And that's where I'll take you next. Our house in Burlington was nothing fancy, but to me, it carried the charm of something lived in, something real. The old wooden floors creaked when you walked across them. The windows sometimes rattled when the wind blew hard off the lake, and the staircase carried the marks of countless footsteps. I used to think of those imperfections as part of its character. They made me feel rooted, connected to something lasting. Inside, the kitchen was always the heart of our mornings. I would pour orange juice, pack Lily's small lunchbox, and listen to her chatter about the shapes she saw in the clouds, or the stories she invented for her stuffed animals. Lily was 6, full of wonder, her imagination as endless as the sky outside those old windows. Being with her felt like standing in the presence of pure light. Mark, my husband, was different. At 40, he carried himself with polished confidence. To the neighbors and his colleagues, he was the picture of success: handsome, reliable, charming. I used to admire that about him, how he seemed to move so easily through the world. But at home, there were times when I caught something else in his eyes, something heavy, calculating. His smile didn't always reach me anymore, and though I tried to brush it off, the distance between us seemed to grow wider with every passing month. Then there was Linda, my mother-in-law. She visited often, sometimes without calling, and every time she walked through the door, I felt my body tense. She carried herself like someone who belonged to another era, poised, elegant, but with a coldness that made me feel small. I knew she didn't think I was enough for her son, and she made sure her silences and sideways glances reminded me of it. With Lily, she was affectionate, but only when Lily behaved like a little adult. If my daughter dared to be silly or messy, Linda's disapproval filled the room like smoke. And then came the inheritance. After my mother passed, I was left with a sum that was supposed to give us security, maybe even freedom. But instead, it cast a shadow. Grief was already pressing down on me, But with it came a shift in the atmosphere of our home. Mark seemed restless, distracted, his eyes lingering too long on papers I didn't recognize. Linda became more present, her voice dripping with suggestions about how I should manage what my mother left me. I wanted to believe they cared for me, that their intentions were good. But my gut whispered otherwise. From the outside, we looked like a picture-perfect family. Warm light in the windows, laughter at the dinner table, a husband and wife raising a beautiful child. But beneath the surface, I felt cracks forming. Something about the way Mark avoided my gaze, the way Linda's comments cut sharper than before, and the way Lily sometimes said things that made me pause. They all hinted at an unease I couldn't quite name. At the time, I told myself it was stress, grief, maybe my imagination. But deep down, I think I already knew. The peace in our home was only an illusion, and the shadows were about to step into the light. And that's where the first signs of unease began to show. It started slowly, almost too quietly to notice. Mark began spending more time in his study. The door closed when it used to be open. I'd walk past and hear the low hum of his voice, muffled and urgent, as if he didn't want me to catch a single word. Sometimes, when I entered the room unexpectedly, he would snap his laptop shut or slide papers into a drawer. He said it was just work, nothing more. But the way his eyes darted away left me unsettled. Money crept into our conversations more than ever before. Not the everyday kind bills, groceries, or Lily's school, but larger, weightier matters, investments, future plans. He spoke about security in a tone that sounded less like comfort and more like calculation. Since my mother's inheritance, I noticed his restlessness, as if that money had shifted something deep inside him. Then there was Lily, my sweet, imaginative girl. One afternoon, she came to me holding an old photograph of my mother. She looked at it with such seriousness that it startled me. She told me Grandma had spoken to her in a dream, telling her we needed to be careful. I wanted to smile and chalk it up to her lively imagination, but my chest tightened instead. How could she have known the very word careful that had been echoing in my own head a few nights later? As I tucked her into bed, she whispered that she had seen her father on the phone with Linda, her grandmother. She said they were whispering about me, about how I wouldn't notice. Lily's eyes were wide, steady, too certain for a child making things up. I brushed her hair gently, murmuring that sometimes adults had work secrets. But inside, doubt spread like cracks in glass. I found myself caught between two truths. On one hand, Mark had always been my partner, the man I thought I could rely on. On the other, my daughter, innocent, pure, incapable of manipulation, was telling me things that gnawed at my soul. Was I imagining it? Was grief making me paranoid? Or was Lily seeing clearly what I refused to admit? That tension grew heavier each day, pressing on me with every closed door, every hushed phone call, every strange comment from Lily that felt less like play and more like a warning. I told myself I was being cautious, but the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might discover if I really looked too closely. And soon enough, my fears would no longer be whispers in the dark. They would take form in something undeniable, something I could never unsee. It happened on an ordinary night, one of those evenings when the house felt still, when Mark had gone upstairs early and Lily was already asleep. I walked past his study and noticed the door slightly ajar. Normally, it was locked tight. Something in me hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe instinct, pushed me inside. At first glance, the room looked as it always did, neat stacks of files, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. But then I saw it, a folder half pulled from the drawer, as if it had been left in a hurry. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Inside was a life insurance policy. My name filled the line for insured. The numbers made my stomach drop, an enormous payout, enough to change someone's life. And in bold print, clear and undeniable, Mark was listed as the sole beneficiary. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the page, my mind racing for explanations. Maybe this was just his way of protecting us, preparing for the worst. Maybe he wanted to make sure Lily would be safe if something ever happened to me. That was the story I tried to tell myself as I stood there in the dim light. But the timing clawed at me. The policy had been taken out only a week after my mother's funeral, right after the inheritance became mine. Too soon. Too deliberate. My fingers gripped the edges of the paper so tightly they nearly tore. I could almost hear my own pulse in my ears, fast and uneven. I slid the documents back carefully, forcing the drawer shut, but nothing felt the same anymore. The air in that room was heavier, suffocating. The man I had shared my life with, trusted with my heart, why would he hide something like this from me? I wanted to dismiss it, to bury the thought deep inside. But doubt had already taken root, and with every heartbeat, it grew sharper, colder, standing there in the silence of that study. I realized this wasn't just a crack in the foundation of our marriage. It was the first glimpse of something much darker. And deep down, I knew this discovery was only the beginning of a nightmare I could no longer avoid. That night started with an emptiness I couldn't quite name. Mark had kissed Lily goodnight, grabbed his suitcase, and told us he'd be gone for a few days on business. His voice was calm, too calm, and I tried to brush away the unease crawling under my skin. After Lily fell asleep, I wandered through the house, checking doors and windows as I always did. That's when I noticed it. The back door wouldn't budge. The lock wasn't jammed from the inside, it had been latched from the outside. My stomach tightened. I moved to the front, then the side door, each one unyielding. Panic began to press against my ribs. That's when I smelled it. At first, faint, like the memory of gasoline clinging to a jacket. Then stronger, thicker, until the air itself felt flammable. I pressed my hand against the window glass, realizing the frames had been reinforced with something heavy. No escape. Upstairs. Lily stirred. I rushed to her room, trying to mask my fear. But she sat up, wide-eyed, as if she had already sensed it. She whispered, with a strange certainty, that her grandmother had come to her in a dream and told her where to hide behind the kitchen pantry, near the old crawl space. Her small hand clutched mine, warm and insistent, pulling me toward the one place I never would have thought of. The smell grew sharper. My throat burned. I could almost hear the house holding its breath, waiting for a spark. Outside, faint footsteps scraped against gravel. Then silence, as if someone was making sure their plan was in motion. I felt betrayal wash over me in waves. This was the man I had built my life with, the father of my child, and he had turned our home into a trap. For a second, my knees nearly gave out, but Lily's steady gaze anchored me. Her innocence carried a kind of courage I had lost. Clutching her to my chest, I knew hesitation could mean the end. I led her toward the kitchen, each step echoing with the weight of choices I never thought I'd face. The walls seemed to close in, heavy with fumes, the air tight with danger. And as we slipped into the shadows of the pantry, pressing ourselves into the hidden gap, I realized this night wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about survival, and our fight to escape was only just beginning. The moment we ducked into the kitchen, the heat hit us like a wall. Flames licked at the wooden beams above, smoke billowed down, stinging my eyes and clawing its way into my lungs. Every breath burned. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the roar of the fire. Lily's small hand gripped mine tightly, steady despite her trembling. She tugged me toward the pantry, toward that hidden crawl space she had spoken of with such conviction. My mind screamed at me to move faster, even as my legs felt heavy, sluggish under the weight of terror. I yanked open the pantry door. The air inside was thicker, darker, but behind the shelves, I saw at a narrow panel, an old wooden board with edges worn smooth from years of use. My hands shook as I pulled it free. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust and earth. It was a tunnel, our only chance. I pushed Lily inside first, her small body disappearing into the darkness. The sound of her coughs echoed back, sharp and thin. I crawled after her, pulling the board back into place with trembling fingers, shutting out the inferno behind us. The tunnel was suffocating. Dirt pressed in on all sides, scraping my arms and legs as I crawled. My knees sank into damp earth, my palms slid on loose soil. Each movement was a battle against panic. My chest heaved, desperate for clean air, but all I tasted was grit and smoke lingering in my throat. Ahead of me, Lily's voice whispered, steady and brave, urging me on. She told me we could make it, that we had to keep moving. Her courage cut through the fear like a lifeline. In that moment, I drew strength from her, letting her belief carry me forward when mine faltered. The deeper we went, the more the fire seemed to chase us. Heat seeped through the earth above, ash and sparks falling through cracks in the boards. I could feel time slipping away, every second pressing us closer to disaster. My muscles screamed for rest, but I refused to stop. I couldn't. Not with Lily ahead of me, not with everything at stake. And then, at last, a sliver of night appeared ahead, a faint glow, cool and blue against the choking dark. The tunnel opened into the backyard, and Lily scrambled out, gasping, pulling me with her. We collapsed onto the grass, the damp earth cool against our skin. My lungs burned as I sucked in the night air, sharp and sweet like salvation. Lily curled against me, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. When I lifted my head, I saw it our house, engulfed in flames, the sky above painted in orange and black. The life I had built inside those walls was burning to the ground. Relief and grief tangled inside me, heavy and raw. We had survived, but I knew this was far from over, because escaping the fire was only the beginning. The truth still waited to be revealed. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, even with the press of bodies filling every bench. The air was heavy with anticipation, each shuffle of papers and scrape of shoes echoing too loudly. I sat there, my palms damp, my chest tight, as Mark and Linda faced the judge just a few feet away. I had once trusted them with my life, and now I was watching them fight to defend the indefensible. Piece by piece, the evidence came forward. Financial records that showed the timing of the insurance policy. witnesses who recalled whispered conversations, investigators who testified about accelerants found around the house. Each fact was another crack in the carefully crafted facade of my marriage, another betrayal dragged into the light. But the moment that shattered any remaining doubt came when Lily was called forward. My heart ached watching her tiny frame climb onto the stand. But she spoke with a courage far beyond her years. She described what she had felt, the dreams, the warnings she had carried from her grandmother, and the night she pulled me toward the pantry. Her voice didn't tremble. It rang with the truth no adult could deny. I felt both pride and heartbreak in that instant. No child should ever have to bear such a burden, yet she carried it with grace, her innocence becoming our shield. When the verdict was finally read, the words felt like a hammer and a release all at once. Guilty. Both of them. My husband, my mother-in-law, the people who should have protected us, were condemned by their own actions. It was painful, unbearable in some ways. Yet beneath the grief was something new, the weight lifting, the chains loosening. Justice had spoken, and at last, we could begin to breathe again. And that was the beginning of our healing. When the fire was out, the trial behind us, and the noise of it all finally faded, there was only silence. It felt strange at first, almost too quiet. But in that stillness, I began to understand what we had survived. I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a child's small hand pulling you forward, or a whisper that you choose to trust. I learned that a mother's instinct can be a lifeline, but so can the pure, unshaken belief of a little girl who refused to let fear win. Betrayal left scars. Yes. But it also reminded me of what cannot be broken, the bond between mother and child. From the ashes of our old life, Lily and I began to build something new, something honest, something safe. And if my story leaves you with anything, let it be this: never ignore your intuition. It may save everything. If this touched you, I'd love for you to like, share, and leave your thoughts below.